Hi, this is Brian Kim. I want to share with you this case of a patient who had a dislocated IOL, and this lens fell all the way back to the retina. And so the retinal specialist took that dislocated lens out, and they left the patient aphakic and referred the patient to me for Yamane technique. This is really the ideal situation if you're first learning how to do the Yamane technique. And so this is the eye. You can see the pupil is nice and big. Using a Wexel sponge, you dry the surface of the eye very well. And then I'm inking the limbus supranasally, and then using the shaft of the cannula, I find 180 degrees apart, and I'm inking the limbus inferotemporally. Drying the surface once again, indenting 2.5 millimeters posterior to that mark, and then indenting 2 millimeters adjacent. And then inking those indentations, again, with the tip of that 27 gauge cannula. You get nice and discrete marks by doing it this way. Doing the same thing on the other side with the fixed caliper, indenting 2.5 millimeters posterior to the limbal mark, and then 2 millimeters adjacent, and then marking those indentations. And these are my incisions to perform limbal vitrectomy. This is the incision for the contralateral limbal incision, as well as for my AC maintainer, filling the eye with dispersive viscoelastic. And then this is a 3 millimeter blade. I make a vertical groove, tunnel through the cornea, and then I enter, making sure that incision is perpendicular to those limbal marks. This is the 22 gauge thin-walled AC maintainer. And this is the emerald cartridge. I'm placing the cohesive viscoelastic through the barrel and on the platform. Placing the Sensor AR40 lens on the platform. Pushing it down, making sure it's seated before bending the wings. And as I bend the wing, it causes the optic to bend. Make sure that the optic bends backward. And the trailing haptic comes out through the back, and the leading haptic goes straight through the barrel. Sliding it into the injector, making sure that the trailing haptic is up outside of the barrel as I advance the plunger. And now I'm ready to go. Here is the bent 25 gauge needle. I'm placing it through the contralateral limbal incision, placing the injector through the main incision. Make sure both bevels are facing each other. As my assistant delivers the lens, the leading haptic comes out. I dock the haptic on the bevel of the needle, and as she delivers the lens more and more of the haptic goes into the needle, and as she advances it, I withdraw the needle, and the haptic comes out passively. I take over, deliver the optic, and then delivering the trailing haptic, making sure it's facing to the right. I'm pulling the leading haptic out a little bit, pushing some more dispersive viscoelastic. And this is the 30 gauge thin-walled needle. I'm stabbing the conjunctiva and sclera on the first mark. I'm holding the anterior chamber maintainer as counterfixation because I didn't want to use any forceps. And I stayed nice and flat, tunneling 2 millimeters and then diving down. I'm using microforceps to slide the trailing haptic towards the left. As I sweep it, I gently place it into the incision without damaging the haptic. Dock the haptic on the bevel of the needle, 2 pushes, and then I'm in. That's all I need to do. That's it. And it's going to grip that haptic very well. Disengaging the needle from the syringe. Pulling the leading haptic into the angle now. So again, in this case, I held counterfixation not by the limbus, but using and holding the anterior chamber maintainer. Now for the left side needle, I'm holding the contralateral limbal incision. I stab the conjunctiva and sclera at the first mark, tunnel 2 millimeters, staying nice and flat. I'm feeling the resistance of the needle to the sclera, approaching the second mark, and I dive down. Look at my needle. It's near parallel to the limbus, and I'm turning it towards and facing the leading haptic. There's no tension on the leading haptic. I dock the haptic on the bevel of the needle, 2 pushes, and then I'm in. I withdraw the left side needle, and as I do this, I make sure that I limit how much of that leading haptic comes outside the eye, and this limits any undue stress on the optic-haptic junction. Cauterizing the tip, you can see the haptic is laying nice and flat and flush to the sclera. Do the same thing on the right side, limiting how much haptic comes out, cauterizing the tip as well. Drying it first, cauterizing the tip. Again, both haptics are flat to the sclera, which means this lens will most mimic an in-the-bag IOL placement. Pushing the haptics, the flanges flush to the sclera, reapproximating the conjunctiva. This is a 10-0 nylon suture to close the main incision. Performing the temporal surgical PI. Again, you want to make the PI just where you can see it, which mimics a laser PI. You don't want to be eating it into the angle and cause a ciliary body bleed. Viscoelastic removal using the vitrector. Pulling the AC maintainer out. Hydrating the incisions, and that's the end of the case. So again, this patient's already had vitrectomy. I performed some limited vitrectomy. You saw, again, a patient who's had vitrectomy, had the lens removed. This is really a nice big pupil. This is really the ideal case to start to learn how to do the Yamane technique. You have to follow basic principles when you're doing this surgery. In my case, I like to externalize the leading haptic through a 25 gauge needle passive docking technique. I like to ink the conjunctiva with the 27 gauge cannula tip, and I like to mark it in such a way that I'm very consistent and routine. And I have a specific technique in stabbing the conjunctiva sclera, flattening it out, and always applying counterforce so that I can push the needle through the sclera 2 millimeters and then diving down. Again, docking the haptic on the bevel of the needle. By externalizing the leading haptic, I'm able to push the optic away from me. I'm able to thread the trailing haptic through the right side needle so easily this way. And then doing the leading haptic last, all the action is away from you. I'm able to turn that needle, again, parallel to the limbus. I'm able to dock that leading haptic on that left side needle so easily. And this really becomes a routine case. So by following these simple steps, you can make these cases very consistent and a routine type of secondary IOL scleral fixation technique case. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.